They think you're nice.
No, don't think I'm nice.
Uh-huh.
You're good.
Okay.
Now you're being recorded.
Okay.
You look nice tonight, Doc.
Thank you. Hi, guys. My name is Kacey, and I am a grateful believer who has struggled with a 22-year drug addiction and who is currently struggling with a tobacco addiction.
Speak into the microphone or else it's not going to pick it up.
On April 17th, 1982, I came into the world. My mom at the time was only 19 and my dad was 22. Both of them were young parents and they raised me till I was 3.5. Then I went to live with my grandma and my grandpa on their farm. At the time, my mother had visitations with me, and one day I went to go visit my mom and she never showed. It was then that I began to feel like no one wanted me. My grandma stepped in as my mother and continued to raise me until I was about 5. By that time, my dad remarried and I went to live with him and his new wife. Little did I know she didn't care about me at all. She would lie to my dad about things that weren't true. Then the physical abuse started between my dad and me. I would get beat with belt buckles, 2x4s, spoons, you name it. I was beat with it. When I would go visit my grandma, I would tell her what was happening to me, so she would set into motion to get me back. But every time she tried, somebody would figure out a way to stop her, and my heart broke. I would end up going and living with my younger sister's grandparents, and in my mind I thought I was safe, but that was the farthest from the truth. My sister's grandpa started to molest me, and he even physically hit me at times. As time went on, I began to act out and get into fights because it felt like nobody wanted to keep me safe. So I went to the only person I knew who would help me and fight for me, and that was my grandma. I told her what was going on, and she started the process of trying to keep me away from these people. After all was said and done, I had lied to a judge about who was truly responsible for doing this to me. Instead of saying it was my stepmom's dad, I told him it was my dad instead. At the age of 14, I started to act out and get into fights. I tried to kill my sister one time with a butter knife. I was then sent away to a juvenile facility in Denver, Colorado, for girls who were out of control at home. I stayed there for a while until my behavior got me dismissed. After I returned to Cortez, I found myself misbehaving, stealing money and several other items just so I would have them. At the age of 16, I was sent to Colorado Springs to an all-girls group home, and it was then that I felt safe. I started going to high school there, and I made friends real easy and life was good. While going to high school, I found a part-time night job at a local McDonald's there. And then one night, everything changed for me when my innocence was... Ooh. When my innocence was taken from me. I had come in for my closing shift and stepped outside to smoke before I went in to start. And about 10 minutes later, this red car pulled up and dropped off 2 of my coworkers. When they went in, the driver of the car asked if he could have a cigarette. I walked over and gave him one. And as soon as I turned around to leave, he jumped out of the driver's seat, grabbed me from behind and threw me in the back seat, proceeded to rape me twice. The whole time I was screaming and praying that someone would come out. Nobody came. After he was done the second time, he looked at me and said, "You can go now." fixed myself the best way I knew how and went in and started my shift at work. When I was finished that night, I got on my bike and rode back to my group home, terrified as to what the people were going to say when I told them. As soon as I made it inside the house, I went straight to the shower and scrubbed my skin. Afterwards, I went and told what had happened, and I was immediately rushed to the hospital where a rape kit was done. Before I left that night, the doctor came in and told me I could never have children. At the age of 19, I found myself ready to graduate high school. On June 8, 2001, I walked across the stage and got handed my high school diploma that I had worked so hard for. That day was the proudest moment in my life. Later that same year, I decided I wanted to leave Colorado Springs and go elsewhere and see the world. So I found this place in Darby, Montana that had what I was looking for. So I enrolled in Job Corps and took welding classes and enjoyed it very much. Just working with fire and metal calmed me. Later, my rebellious behavior got me into trouble and I was asked to leave. So I packed my bags and boarded a plane and I was on my way back home. I found a little apartment and got a job and I was happy and loving life. Then one day I got a knock at my door and it was Tiffany standing there. Whew. Tiffany is the one person I could always talk to about anything. She was my partner in crime growing up. She was my cousin, my sister, and my best friend. She looked at me and cried. We were reunited, and she wanted to take me to see my grandma for the first time in years. And it was then that this feeling came over me and I was finally home in the house that I was raised in. Oh. On March 4th, 2005, I lost the only woman I called Mom, my grandma. I got the call that she wanted me there so that I could say my final goodbye. When I arrived at the hospital, I went into her room and sat there and held her hand and talked to her as if we hadn't missed a beat. That day, I asked her to tell me everything that had happened to me as a kid and why things went the way they did. She told me that none of what happened was my fault. She wanted me to stop blaming myself. And I promised her that I wouldn't blame myself for others' choices. I find myself remembering her and what she taught me as a child. After she died, I packed up and left Colorado and went to Georgia and tried to reconnect with the woman who left me at the age of 3.5. When I got there, it was like meeting her for the first time again. As time went on, the relationship between us wasn't what I thought. One night we were sitting down talking and I happened to mention that I had a black guy for a friend. Then she jumped up out of her chair and jumped on top of me and beat my face in. After that, I packed my stuff and I looked at my mom and I told her, I hope you die. And I left for Florida. In 2015, when I finally got to Florida, I was homeless, scared, because I honestly didn't know anyone. And one day while out walking, I happened to find a shelter called the Salvation Army. So I decided to see if I could stay, and for whatever reason, I was led to this place. So I took a chance and went for it. I was taken in and given a place to stay so that I would be safe. When I met the director of the shelter, she was the most loving and caring person I had ever met. She told me about the Salvation Army, and she introduced me to the pastors of the church that was next door to the shelter. Major Julie Cornett and Bob Cornett. As soon as I met these two wonderful people, I knew then that I was meant to meet them. Again, for whatever reason, I went with it. Julie Cornett is like another mother figure to me, because when I sat and talked to her for the first time, I felt in my heart that I could trust her. And it was then that I began to open up about who I truly was and what had happened to me to get me to where I was. I started going to church, and after a few times I began to get curious about who this Jesus was and what he was about. And then I kept thinking to myself, what in the world can Jesus do for me? And little did I know just what that was. That very same year, I would meet James Jr. Smith. And he was like any other person I met before. And it wasn't long until we started seeing each other and things started out good between us at first. And I would later find out months later that I was pregnant and I was scared. I didn't know how James would react to the news of me being pregnant. So I went to Major Julie and I told her, and she then helped me break the news to James. When he found out, he was happy at first, and he took care of me and helped me until one day everything started to change. He started to mentally abuse me while carrying my first child, and I didn't understand why he was acting like this. So he went out and found us a place to stay so that I would have somewhere to bring my son after he was born. Shortly before we moved in, I went into labor with Ezekiel, and it was off to the hospital I went. I wanted nothing more than for James to be there when his son was born, but he decided to do what he wanted instead. I went into labor June 1st, 2015, and 24 hours later, Ezekiel was here on June 2nd, 2015. After Zeke and I were able to go home, the fighting between me and James only got worse and worse. James would often tell me that Zeke wasn't his son and that he looked Mexican. He would also tell me that I was unfit to be a mom and that I didn't deserve to have Zeke. I would eventually start to believe him, but I never let it show in front of my son or him, because then James would come even harder at me than before. Eventually my self-confidence was broken and I felt I was worth nothing. One day I looked into my child's eyes and I promised him one day we would escape. I made good on that promise when I found out I was pregnant with my second child. I wasn't going to let him hurt me or my babies ever again. So I started to plan our escape, but the only way it was going to happen was if I brought him with me. And that's just what I did. After we got the tickets, we were Colorado bound the next morning. When we arrived, I called my aunt, and she came to pick us up. We ended up staying with her until James got worse than he was before, and all he wanted to do was fight and argue with me. The next day, I told my aunt to send him back to Florida so that me and the boys could finally be safe from him. On February 19th, 2016, I was introduced to the Pinion Project. I quickly signed up for parenting classes and numerous other programs they had. I got introduced first to a wonderful lady named Maggie, who took me and my sons and made us feel wanted. At first I was scared of these people because of what I had just been through. I would later be introduced to another amazing woman named Crystal. And little did I know that she had been through some of the same things I had. And the more I talked to her, the safer I started to feel. I started to open up to her and tell her about me. Then one day I showed up and I was angry, and Crystal knew it. So she took me in her office and made me stand in front of her desk and look out this window. And she asked me this very question. She said, "What do you see?" And I said at first I didn't answer. Then she asked me the same question. And this time I answered, freedom. The very next day, I met Amanda. become a very close friend and a family member. Amanda came into my life at the right time when I needed someone. She has seen me at my worst and seen me at my best. Along with her and others at Pinion Project, I wouldn't be who I am today. A very good friend of mine was talking to me about this recovery group that she thought might help me with my demons. So I took her up on that offer and I went. When I walked through these church doors, I felt angry, alone, and most of all frightened, because I really didn't know who all these people were. To be honest, I wanted to turn around and run far and hide, but something inside me said stay. So I did. The first day I came, I was introduced to Daphne, who right away made me feel comfortable. She asked me for my name and then she told me that my babies were cute. I remember telling her thank you. Celebrate Recovery has taught me that sobriety is possible and that God does have a plan made out for me. And that plan included taking my very first step study, where I learned that I had layers that needed to be peeled away and dealt with. On August 15th, 2020, I received the worst news ever once again. I had found out that my sister was found dead in a hotel room. When I got this, my body went into a state of shock and confusion. My heart hurt like no other. Tiffany is and will be forever my sister. I blamed myself for her death, and I also blamed myself for not being there to stop her. At the time, I didn't realize how bad her demons had gotten. I began to feel like a failure as a sister because I'm sure she tried to tell me, but I didn't listen. The pain and hurt of losing Tiffany caused me to slip right back down into my dark hole where I gave up on me. And most of all, I gave up on my kids. I quit eating and I didn't take care of me or my babies. I pushed everyone away from me because I thought I could handle the grieving on my own. I couldn't. After a few days, I called my sponsor and I admitted to what I was going through and that I had talked to God. I gave my grief and pain to God and let Him fight the battle for me, which in turn becomes my life verse. Revelation chapter 3, verse 7 through 8 says, "These are the words of Him who is holy and true, who holds the key of David. What He opens, no one can shut, and what He shuts, no one can open. I know your deeds. See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. I know that you have little strength, yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name." Then one night while I was sleeping, Tiffany came to me in a dream and told me this. She said, "Sister, I am at peace. My demons are done. I love you." After hearing that, I knew in my heart she was okay. I will forever carry the memories and most of all, I will carry Tiffany with me, always. Taking my first step study was the best decision I could have made in my entire life. What I took away from that was that God accepts me despite what I may or may not have done. I also learned that I have a root to all my anger and just where that came from. At first I was scared, and I didn't have any clue that this is what God had laid out for me. After all my peeling of the layers, I began to accept this test. And I grabbed it and ran. After I was done my storms at ease, I knew God had made me brand new on the inside. It was during this step study that I came home one day and threw out my drugs and quit and started my path to sobriety with God's help. Today I'm extremely proud to say that I have successfully battled and defeated a 22-year drug habit. I am honored to say that Jesus, thank you. Psalm 18, verse 1 through 3 says, I love you, Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, my deliverer. My God is my rock in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I called to the Lord who is worthy to be praised, and I have been saved from my enemies. I admit that there were times I didn't want to finish, but God kept pushing me until I gave in and finished. In the end, I had earned my very first step study check. When the day came, I asked a special request to have my sponsor, Kari, handed to me. And when I received it, I cried hard because I completed something that others told me I would fail at. I never imagined that God would ever love and accept someone like me. Celebrate Recovery is my chain breaker and my saving grace on so many levels. I figured out just what the root of my anger, anxiety, etc. I began to come out of my security blanket, and now I can say for certain that the raging storms that were once in me are now at peace, and I have Jesus to thank for that.